Welcome to a pod somewhere in time. If you're listening to the podcast or watching on the Layer of the Alchemist YouTube channel, either way, welcome. I'm your host, John, and I'm here with my co host, Mattias. And on today's episode, we are going to be discussing Iron Maiden's second studio album, Killers. Released on February 16th, 1981, on EMI Records in the UK, and on May 11th, 1981, for North America on Harvest and Capitol Records. The album would be a combination of first and lasts for the band. The first album to feature new guitarist Adrian Smith, who would replace Dennis Stratton. Adrian's connection to the band went back a few years as he had played in a band named Urchin with Dave Murray. Adrian was even offered the Iron Maiden gig as far back as 1979, which he at the time declined. Urchin would eventually disband, and Smith would find himself alongside his old buddy Dave again in Iron Maiden. Another first was the introduction of producer Martin Birch into the Iron Maiden family. Martin, already at that point a very well respected producer for his work with legendary bands like Deep Purple, Wishbone Ash, Rainbow, Black Sabbath, and many others. Martin would produce every Iron Maiden album from that point through 1992's Fear of the Dark. Killers would also send Iron Maiden to America for the first time, opening for Judas Priest and doing select headlining shows, with their first show on U.S. soil being at the Aladdin in Las Vegas, Nevada. As for lasts, this album would mark the last studio record with singer Paul Di'Anno, who would be let go from the band for various reasons related to stage performance, lack of reliability, and drug and alcohol intake. As is often the case in situations like this, details and reasons for his departure are a bit murky. As with all Iron Maiden albums, there were singles released, first being the double A-sided Twilight Zone backed with Wrathchild. Twilight Zone being a song only available on the international version of Killers. Purgatory, backed with Genghis Khan, would be the second single released from the album. Also of note around this period was the September 14th, 1981 release of the live EP Maiden Japan. The European and Japanese versions would feature 4 live songs recorded in Japan on May 23rd, 1981, with the international version having 5 songs. Iron Maiden and their label EMI would, in hindsight, be forerunners of the video era, with their release on May 11th, 1981, of the video concert Live at the Rainbow, which showcased the band in top early form, performing 7 songs at the Rainbow Theatre in London on December 21st, 1980. Of note, it features an early version of Killers with different lyrics, and this would be one of the early gigs with new guitarist Adrian Smith. All right, Matthias, what are your memories, thoughts, and feelings on the second Iron Maiden studio album, Killers?
Yeah, like I told you in the first or the previous episode of this pod, I borrowed this album along with the first one and Number of the Beast at the same time, and this must have been in 1985. I was 11 years old, and borrowing records to tape them was very common, as albums were really expensive. So I borrowed these records, and I must confess that at the time, and for the longest of times in the 80s and early 90s, I thought that Killers was the Killers was my least favorite album. I just think, in hindsight, the reason was that it was sort of overshadowed by the other albums. Peace of Mind, Power Slave, and Number of the Beast, at least for me, are better albums, and I still think that. But I think I have reevaluated the album a lot, and I think today I appreciate it as much as any of the 80s albums for what it is. I must have bought it myself around 86. We, just like you, I grew up in a very rural area, so we didn't really have a record store in the town, or village rather, of Virserum in Småland, southern Sweden. But there was this toy store. It was like a paper combined toy store. And for a while, the guy who ran it had like budget vinyls for sale. really, really cheap, like half the price of a regular. So in Europe, there was this sub EMI label called Fame. So older albums got like a reissue on this Fame label, and I got that, and I think I bought it for something like 39 Swedish or something, which is at back then an album would have cost like 69 or 75 or something. So it was quite cheap. Um, but how about you, John? When did you first discover Killers?
I did not get the Killers album until a little bit later. And preparing for this episode, I was sort of racking my brain and trying to understand why that was, because I'm certain it wasn't because I didn't want it. I think it was just simply a case of it wasn't in my record store. And like you, I came from a very small town. The nearest record store was at the mall, which was 20, 30-minute drive from where we lived. So my parents would only go to the mall every 2 months, every 6 weeks. And having a limited budget, I could only buy so many things when we would go to the mall. So maybe I would have enough money for two or three cassettes. And this is kind of hard to imagine this in this day and age where literally everything is right at our fingertips at any moment is in as far as music. But back then, and I'm speaking of cassettes because that's what I was buying back then, the record store only had so much space. So for any artist, you may have maybe they'd have 6 to 8 cassettes from any particular artist if they were a popular artist.
Mm.
And I just don't remember seeing Killers. Like I remember when Number of the Beast came out, that was very popular. So the store might have had 3 or 4 copies of Number of the Beast there. I don't think I got Killers till after Peace of Mind. And I do remember seeing it at one point in the store. And I do have this memory of seeing it and thinking, okay, I'll get it the next time we're back. Because this is another thing that's hard to remember. But at that time, you'd walk into the music store every other month and you only had enough money for 2 or 3 cassettes. I only had that much. And artists were releasing albums once a year. Sometimes a live album would be in there. So you would walk into the store and you'd be like, oh, there's a new Dio record. Oh, there's a new Black Sabbath album. I was trying to build up my collection of classic bands like Jethro Tull and Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple. So sometimes you walked in there and you had to make decisions, I guess is what
Mm.
I'm saying. And I remember making the decision that, oh, I'll get Killers next time I'm here. And of course, the next time I showed up, it wasn't there. But eventually I did get it. And the other thing of note too was, and I checked this today, I went into Discogs and checked uh, record clubs. And I'm not sure if you had this over in Sweden or over in Europe, but record clubs were where you could pay a penny and you got like 10 cassettes, 10 or 11 cassettes, and then you had to buy 3 or 4 at some point in the next year or in the future at regular price. And that's how they sort of got you. The regular price was very expensive. So, and I thought to myself, because I was in record clubs at that time, and that was a great way of how I was stocking up on the classic rock bands like the Beatles and Zeppelin and the Stones and Van Halen and stuff like that, because they had a lot of that stuff, Rush. And I thought, why didn't I get it through the record club? And I went and looked through Discogs and looked at the US cassette versions, and there is no record club version of Killers. So that was also something I said, aha, that's probably another reason why it took me so long to get around to getting the Killers. So eventually I get Killers, and at that point I already had the self-titled album. That was my first Iron Maiden record. I already had Number of the Beast, and I'm pretty sure I already had Peace of Mind. And like you, my reaction to Killers was it was kind of strange because it felt like I was going back Whereas at that point, I was sort of moving. I got Number of the Beast when it was out. I got Peace of Mind when it was out. So this felt like I was sort of stepping back in time. And I remember liking it because it was more Iron Maiden, but I remember it didn't grab me right away. And there were songs on it that definitely did, like
mm,
Wrathchild, Murders in the Rue Morgue, Killers. Those songs really jumped out at me. Those songs really grabbed me. But the rest of the album, it it felt kind of strange to me. It didn't grab me like the other albums did. And as I was prepping for this episode, I listened to the album from top to bottom, and I think what it was a lot of the songs, especially when you get to side two of the album, when you get to stuff like Twilight Zone, Prodigal Son, Purgatory, Drifter, even to a certain extent, like Another Life and Innocent Exile. They weren't songs that had big choruses in them. They weren't
mm,
like Invaders or, Children of the Damned, or
mm,
Fly on Your Way, Flight of Icarus. These songs that
mm,
had very, if you're gonna die, die with your boots on. If you're going, where the chorus, the
mm,
title of the song and the chorus of the song is
mm,
very anthemic and it's
mm,
very there. So when you look at the record, you're like, okay, die with your boots on, or it just seemed to lack some of the hooks for me that
mm,
Number of the Beast and Peace of Mind had. But as time has gone on, Killers has become a real favorite for me. And I think it's because for that same reason, there's songs on here that feel like songs that Iron Maiden would never really do songs like this again. Like
mm,
I'm specifically thinking of Prodigal Son, for instance, and
mm,
we'll get into this as we go through the songs. So it feels a bit different
mm,
than the other Iron Maiden albums. And also, it's an album that I'm not as burnt out on.
mm,
Besides Wrathchild, there's not a lot of songs on here that Iron Maiden carried with them through the 80s. Like Killers got some play, Murders in the Rue Morgue got some play, but really Wrathchild is the big one. Wrathchild is, I mean, when you think of Live After Death, the only song from Killers on Live After Death, if I'm correct, is Wrathchild.
mm,
Correct, right?
yeah,
So a lot of these songs feel like deep cuts, especially side two for me. That really
mm,
feels like kind of deep cut songs, songs that I'm not burnt out on. Like when I pull out Peace of Mind, even though I love Peace of Mind, it's one of my favorite Iron Maiden records. There's some burnout factor there. Flight of Icarus, The Trooper, same thing with Number of the Beast, the song The Number of the Beast, Children of the Damned, Hallowed Be Thy Name. There's a little bit of burnout factor on those two records. So I find Killers to be an interesting and it kind of feels like a mysterious record for me. I guess it's a classic sophomore album, right? They say
mm,
this all the time. Bands have their entire life to write their first album, and then they have 6 months to write their second record. Now, for this particular record, there were a bunch of these songs Iron Maiden had been playing before even they recorded the first album. For instance, Wrathchild. We've mentioned Wrathchild.
mm,
Uh, or some of these songs were morphed and changed a little bit from earlier Iron Maiden songs. But there's just this kind of feel on this record to me. A lot of the songs are Steve Harris written songs. Uh, so the album just has this feel to me that it's a sophomore record and that they're trying some different things. They got all that energy, they put all that energy and the songs that go over really well live. They put that on the first record. And then this one has some songs to it that don't feel like they would work quite as well in the live environment. But it's a very, for me now personally, it's a very enjoyable album. We
mm,
mentioned Martin Birch. We can talk about his contribution to this album into the band. I think the production on this record is very warm
mm,
sounding to me. I've always liked the production on this. It has a nice sort of warm brown sound to it. It's not harsh or bright. It's not. Whereas I do like the production on the first album. You can go back listen to our last podcast episode to hear us talk about that. But that is kind of a simple raw production, whereas
Mm.
this it's smooth enough, but it's not too polished, but it's got just kind of nice, warm, analogy type of sound to it. So
Yeah, I mean, all the sounds on Killers are very in their spot, in their place. Everything is so neatly put. But just like you said on the first album, you can also hear every instrument and everything. But on Killers, it's just like next level.
mhm.
It's Martin Birch level. So it's the it's the top shelf, the best one, and absolutely. I think that I want to quote our mutual friend Jonathan over at Maiden A to C pod, and he's some once said that Killers is like the club gig in itself. It's a perfect
Mm.
club gig, and I can sort of see that you got the opening, and then it just goes on and into like Drifter, the rock and roll good time encore song. And I mean, Drifter was indeed the encore for a long time before they even recorded Killers. So, but shall we get into some trivia and details around the album before we start
Yeah,
to talk?
I want to talk about Martin Birch though. I want to bring up the
Hmm?
point that we talked about this on the first album, and this is something that I think is a unique strength of Iron Maiden is that on the front you have the band members, but then let's call it behind the scenes. You have these very, very important pieces that when the band puts them into place and they all serve a very important role in Iron Maiden's career and their success. Rod Smallwood comes in on the before the first record. He's
Yeah,
with the band to this day.
yeah,
That's a very unique thing in the music industry. You listen to any history of any band, Black Sabbath, for instance. I plug for my Black Sabbath podcast, Into the Void, a Black Sabbath
mm,
podcast. We often talk on there about how Sabbath was constantly dealing with management problems, getting ripped
yeah,
off, bad career decisions. That's not the case with Iron Maiden. Rod Smallwood comes in. He's a piece to the puzzle. Derek Riggs comes in. Derek Riggs
mm,
creates that consistency through the album covers, through the image of the band, portraying this very consistent image that lines up really good with the band. Rod Smallwood lines up perfectly with the goals of the band. Derek Riggs perfectly fits in with the band. Now we have the next big behind the scenes piece to the puzzle, which is Martin Birch.
mm,
Martin Birch, as I mentioned in the intro, not new to this. He comes in with a great resume, something that the band respected him for. So thus they listened to him. Hey, he's the guy that produced Machine Head. You know, they all
mm,
worship Deep Purple's Machine Head. So they were very receptive to any feedback, input that Martin Birch would have. And Martin, as I mentioned in the intro, stays with them up to and including Fear of the Dark. So there's this consistency
mm,
in the band's production, the way they go into the studio. Martin Birch being I would describe his production, and you mentioned Made in A to Z. You guys did an excellent multi-part episode on Martin Birch. Check that
yeah,
out on the Made in A to Z podcast. And I think Martin's strength is letting the band be the band. He's not an overly controlling producer. I'd imagine he's kind of like a guy that's there to guide the band, to let them do their thing, but to also sort of guide them and to get the sounds. And so
mm,
I think it's really important when you think about how successful Iron Maiden is, arguably the most successful metal band of all time. This is a big, big part of it, that the consistency from management to image, artwork to production. This is a a very important part of the Iron Maiden story, in my opinion. Any other band, I'll keep using Black Sabbath as the example. Various producers, various debacles with managers, with
Mm.
Born Again. How did this album come out sounding like this? Just that's just the Black Sabbath story. And that's not uncommon for many, many bands to go through this, to have inconsistencies with the vision, with the direction of the band. And here for me, Killers, of course, Paul's going to leave the band, be let go from the band. So you could maybe say that, all right, well, with Number of the Beast, everything really settles in, and they really start accelerating and picking up speed with
Yeah.
their career. But here, as they're moving along, and they're doing it very early in their career, they're not fumbling around with various producers. I mean, yeah, they had a
Mm.
different producer on the first record,
Mm.
but they could have easily have had the first four records could have been a different producer for each record and varying results. And the
Mm.
band really from this point on, the band never complains about the production on any of their records because again, they're 100% on page. Martin Birch, he isn't just a producer, he's a team member. He's a sixth member of the band, as is
Mm.
Rod Smallwood, as is Derek Riggs. And you can even go beyond that to the lighting guy. Who's the lighting guy that's with them from the
Dave
early?
Lights.
Dave Lights. There
Mm.
again, the stage production is very
Mm.
consistent because they bring in people that have the same vision, that want to move the band forward in the same way. They trust these people and they stick with these people, and it creates this very consistent quality product that Iron Maiden would put out. And for me, that begins here with Killers.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Martin Birch was actually introduced to Iron Maiden by Richie Blackmore. If I remember this correctly, Martin was in New York recording Blue Oyster Cult, and I think he visited Richie, who lived in the New York area in the early 80s, or this should have been in 1980, I guess. And Richie allegedly played him the first album, the first Iron Maiden album, and just said, "Why don't you work with these guys?" So, I mean, and he thought the same when he listened to the album. He thought, "Why didn't they ask me to produce them?" Martin was connected to a publishing company called Zamba Publishing, and Zamba was also one of the key players behind Iron Maiden. That they worked with Iron Maiden from the first album, Zamba Publishing. So there was like a shortcut to Martin Birch through the publishing company. And talking of Zamba, they also used this studio, which by now is known as Battery Studio. The first album was mixed in a studio called Morgan Studios, but in 1980-81, the studio was bought by the publishing company Zamba and was renamed to Battery. Battery Studios was, in fact, a multiple. There were more rooms than one. So, for example, at the same time, more or less, as the band recorded Killers, the band Samson were recording their album in the next room, so to speak. And the singer, of course, for Samson at that time was Bruce Dickinson. So
Mhm.
there are so many like connections here and there that just makes this all gel together so nicely. We will talk about the more Samson Iron Maiden connections as we go through the very songs, of course, because there is a very interesting story behind one of the tracks on the album, and that connects them to Samson, indeed. What's more to say? Yeah, we spoke about Adrian and this being his first album with the band. Uh, Adrian got into the band in like the first week or something of November 1980. His first official appearance was in a German TV show recorded mid-November. So he had only been in the band for a few weeks as they went to Germany to do this TV show, Pop Rock in Concert, I think the show was called, or something like that. Then just a few days after that, remember from the last episode, we talked about the single Women in Uniform. Women in Uniform was now put out and in the charts. So they had to do a top of the tops episode for the BBC. So just a few weeks in, he was now on the BBC doing this, playing Women in Uniform. And then they went on a tour of the UK. And they played like, I think they canceled one gig for some reason, I can't remember. But they played like 9 or 10 gigs in the UK, sort of to just get Adrian into the band. And the live photos that you can see on the back of Killers were taken on one of these gigs. You can see here. These photos were taken by Robert Ellis. And according to Luis Mariano Rodriguez's book, they were taken in Manchester on that tour in November 1980. So they began to record the album in early December of 1980. They recorded until over Christmas and New Year and finished the recording of the album in early January of 81. So it was a 1-month recording. And I think Martin were booked to do, I think it was the Whitesnake album. So he had to leave the recording before they had finished it. And the very last song to be recorded in the session at Battery Studios were a song named Twilight Zone, which you mentioned are on the North American and Japanese version of Killers. It's not on the European versions of the album. So Adrian was in the band, and all the way back since the late 80s, I've heard this story that they had asked Adrian, and they had he had declined once. They got Dennis. He was out of the band, and by then, Adrian's own band, Urchin. And remember, for Urchin, he was not a lead player. He was a lead vocalist and a rhythm player for that band. And Urchin was sort of his band along with his mates. That band has folded. They had a new band called Broadway Brats for a few months. That didn't work out. So when Iron Maiden again asked him if he wanted to join, he was more eager to get into the band. Okay. So the story I heard from back in the 80s was that if Adrian Smith would have declined once again, they would have asked Phil Collen, who was then in a band called Girl, wow. And he would later join Def Leppard.
Wow.
And I've never heard Phil Collen was like a childhood friend of Paul Di'Anno. They grew up in the same area. Def Leppard were from the north of England, but Phil Collen came from London. And he was recruited to Def Leppard after they recorded the first album. I'm not a huge Def Leppard fan, but I think he isn't on the first album. High and Dry, yeah. I think High and Dry was his first with Def Leppard. Anyway, funny thing is that just a few years back, someone interviewed Phil Collen and asked him about this. Like, is this really true? Did you actually were going to be the guitar player of Iron Maiden? And he said that, yeah, I've heard that story. But truth be told, if they had asked me back then, I would have said no. I wouldn't have been interested in playing Iron Maiden because Iron Maiden didn't at all play the kind of hard rock that I wanted to play. So all these stories about, yeah, it could have been Phil Collen. Well, apparently not. But it's a nice story. And
yeah, that's interesting.
As a funny twist to the story, and this was something that got out in public just a few years back. is that at the time when Adrian was out of the band in the 90s, he was actually doing auditions for Def Leppard along with Phil Collins after Steve
Wow.
Clark died. So he was one of like a handful of guys that they tried out. But as we all know, he didn't get the job in Def Leppard. But it's a it's a small world when you think of it. I think it's
Wow.
quite funny. Mm,
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting thing to think about if Phil, yeah, Phil came in on the Pyromania album with Def Leppard. There's still a little bit of Pete Willis,
mm,
I think, on Pyromania, but I I guess it's worth noting that Adrian, you mentioned that Adrian comes from Urchin, and in Urchin he was a singer, more playing rhythm guitar. So I think Adrian's lead playing is a nice contrast to Dave's style.
mm. Oh
Dave,
yeah.
to me, feels more off the cuff, kind of winging it, legato, kind of smooth, connected lines, Hendrix influenced. Whereas Adrian, for me, is a much more thought out. Maybe that's because he wasn't an experienced lead guitar player, so he had to think his parts out more. I don't know. But either way, the end result, I believe, is that Adrian's solos always feel kind of a little bit more melodic and thought
Mm,
out. His style is different. You know, I mentioned Dave has more this more legato, like a lot of hammer-ons and pull-offs, whereas Adrian kind of picks the notes more. He has a different guitar tone. Adrian, for me, I always think of like Michael Schenker. He kind of comes from that
mm,
sort of Michael Schenker school of guitar playing. So, whereas I didn't have a problem with Dennis Stratton, I don't think Dennis stood out as differently against Dave as Adrian does. So it creates this nice dynamic of two lead guitar players, but with different styles.
mm. I now I'm only guessing, but now when you say that, maybe it's so that when Dennis Stratton was in the band, he was such a good player that he tried to adapt to what he conceived to be the style of the band. And listening to Dave's playing, he was trying not to copy, but to catch that sort of energy to his playing. Because I mean, after Dennis was kicked out of the band, and when he sort of got back into the game again with his own band Lionheart later in the 80s, that is like total melodic uh, hard rock. I wouldn't call it metal, but it's very, very melodic stuff. And I think that maybe that was more his home turf. With Adrian, like you say, he back then wasn't that technical, or should I say, like a natural lead player, but he indeed had to sort of work his solos, and I mean, his melodic ear and his phrasing is just uh, amazing. I mean, it's so good. And I think the two styles of them, and Dave and Adrian was, of course, childhood friends. So they knew each other for many years. And Dave started to play guitar. Adrian wanted to start playing guitar too because his friend Dave was playing guitar. But then they weren't in the same bands. Dave got into Maiden. They had the first band together called, I think it was called Evil Ways or something catchy.
Right.
Um, and then Dave got into Maiden, and Adrian started his own band along with some other mates, like we mentioned before, Urchin. Urchin recorded a few two singles, and Dave was also in the band for a few weeks when he was out of Maiden at the later part of the 70s. So I mean, the connection was there, and I think that it's one of the very much beautiful friendships in music, I would say, because I mean, you can tell that they are very passionate of each other as friends and people, and they're playing just just like you say, is very much in harmony with each other. So I don't, and maybe that's the reason why it worked so smoothly, because they were friends. And even though he wasn't firsthand a lead player in Urchin, getting into the band was more easy because he was friends with Dave and
Yeah.
so on. Yeah.
Yeah, and of course Adrian's songwriting would come into play as the albums move on. But I also want to comment on the album cover that
Mm.
you're starting to see Derek's style with what you might call Easter eggs, these little things on the cover, like the bottom corner, there's like a bar that you can see Ruskin, the Ruskin arms, right? The people in the windows. Uh, yeah, you're sort of, and this is going to become a trademark thing with Derek Riggs and the Iron Maiden album covers, where of course you have the central image, which in this case is Eddie with the axe and somebody hanging on for dear life, who we can only assume Eddie has gotten at. Uh, but it begins this sort of process of these little details in the album covers, whereas on the first record, it's really pretty much Eddie, just Eddie's standing there, Eddie the Ed there, Eddie's head, Eddie's upper body. But now it's sort of moving into this thing, and I think that that's really cool. I've always appreciated that. I love the back cover. You mentioned that already. I love this is sort of a classic 80s thing, a stage shot and then individual squares for each one of the band members. I just think that that's super, super cool.
Yeah, this copy, as you can see, has it's signed by Paul Diano. It's a Swedish edition, one of the few there is. And I think if you at home listening bring out your Killers on vinyl, there is a really weird sort of Easter egg. And it took me many years before I even discovered this. But if you bring out your copy and you, under the D in Iron Maiden, uh, and you bring out your magnifying glass, you can see there's some sort of winged demon or something. It's very tiny, and it's only visible on the very early versions. Reissues and so on are often of lesser quality when it comes to the print of the album. So then it just looks like a little smudge. But
Mm.
on the first editions, you can clearly see, if you bring out a magnifying glass, that there's in the sky, underneath the D in Iron Maiden, you'll find a little winged sort of guy, demon or something. And I mean, yeah, I think it really gives everything so much atmosphere. Derek Riggs have talked about that the inspiration for the background here, as you can see, was actually him just looking outside where he lived in Finchley in northern London. So this is what it looked like where he was
Mhm.
living at the time. So and I mean that I, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but when you talk to like diehard Maiden fans, some fans refer to these earlier albums as Street Maiden, because there's always like a street light
Yeah,
somewhere, like on
yeah,
Women in Uniform.
yeah,
There's on Killers and the first one, and I mean, yeah, that's Street Maiden for you. But
yeah.
absolutely.
All right. Well, how about before we get into the track listing, you had a couple trivia things you wanted to share.
Yeah, I think that we can talk about the general reception, because that is quite interesting. The first album was put out and it just got straight into place number 4 on the English charts. It got great reviews. They went on tour doing the Metal for Mothers tour. They did the tour with Judas Priest. and then they toured in Europe with Kiss, like big tours. So when it was time to record this album, they were touring and touring, and they didn't have that much time to actually write new songs. And this was apparently at the time, back in 1981, was some sort of issue with many of the reviewers. I mean, for you and me today, or for anyone finding this band today or after 1981, which is most of us listening to this pod, I guess, these things doesn't really matter. But for people back then, a lot of reviewers and even fans reacted to the fact that there was not that many new songs on the album. As we go through the album track by track, I will tell you when the different songs when they originate from. But this was a problem apparently for reviewers, because they thought that we've heard Rothschild before. We've heard Drifter before. Why do you put out this song? Don't you have anything new? And there were like rumors going around that, well, they can't write new songs, like they're finished already, and this is only their second album. So it didn't get that high praise as the first one, even though many thought that Martin Birch's production was really, really good, of course. Killers got in highest chart position in the UK, was on number 12 on the Billboard. As you said, it was released a bit later in the US. It entered at 78. And another funny thing about connections is that when they did the European tour for Killers, they had a band named More opening up for them as special guests. And More had their singer was a guy called Paul Mario Day. And Paul Mario Day was, of course, the first lead singer of Iron Maiden. So again, there's all these connections back and forth between players, like in this case with the opening act. So I don't know. I think I'll save the other trivia stuff for the very songs it concerns. So first song, Ides of March, what do you think?
I think it's an awesome intro. I love it. This when I talked about discovering Iron Maiden, the sound that they had that differentiated them from the other bands I was listening to at the time, like AC/DC and Kiss, was this sort of classical medieval sounding thing. And this is what this intro is. It's kind of epic, moves through the minor scale there. So it has this sort of fanfare thing to it. The way the drums start doing like almost like a military roll type thing as it starts picking up the guitar melodies, the way the whole thing builds. I think it's fantastic. I think it's super cool. And I remember being very into it at the time. It seemed again, it's stuff that I was listening to. Nobody was really doing things like this. So I thought it was really cool intro. I love the way it moves into Wrathchild. I think it's just perfect. But what do you think of Ides of March?
I I enjoy it, of course. As I mentioned before, there was a connection to Samson, and here is the very interesting story of Ides of March. Ides of March was recorded as an intro tape in the late 70s. At that time, Barry Graham Purkis, also known as Thunderstick, was in Iron Maiden. And it was his idea with the Rolling Toms. And so he and Steve sort of co-wrote this song. Okay, back in the spring of 1980, Clive Burr, now in Iron Maiden, visits his old friends in Samson as they're recording their album Head On. And on Head On, there is a song called Thunderburst. Thunderburst is indeed Ides of March. It's the same song, more or less. There is a acoustic guitar playing, but I mean, apart from that, it's identical to the Maiden one. And of course, Clive said, "What? What? Are you recording this song? This is a Maiden song," because he didn't know about the story, the origin of the song. And of course, this came to the attention of the management to Roll Smallwood, and Thunderstick was called to a business meeting where he was where he was informed that this was not okay. It's not his song. So on the Samson album Head On, and the album was released in the summer of 1980. So it was like more than half a year before the Iron Maiden version was released. So on the Samson album, it's a co. It's Steve get credit along with the band Samson, but on the Iron Maiden version, it's only Steve Harris who has the credits.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's. But I mean, again, this was something that fans going to concerts knew. Today, it doesn't matter for us, but apparently people were thinking, I know this song. And I think it's really good. The first solo is Adrian's, which is a nice solo, and then it's Dave's. And then we just head into Rothschild.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned those toms in Ides of March because I always love those big, that thing. That's very cool.
Mm,
But yeah, Wrathchild. Okay, this is a song that they've been playing live since this point in time. Don't really need to hear this song live. This is a song that I don't think I've ever liked the live version better than the studio version. That's with
mm,
Paul, that's with Bruce. And for me, a lot of it comes down to the tempo. Here on the record, the tempo of the song is right on the money. It's right in the right spot. Live, they always play it too fast, but here it's perfect. Again, coming out of Ides of March and that bass intro, so cool. We're both bass players. I was just starting to play bass around this time. So hearing this kind of thing was like, yeah, man, this is so cool. Like the bass, kicking the song off like this. Also of note, I would say that this album in general might have some of Steve's best bass playing on it. He's all over this record. I mentioned
mm,
earlier that it's pretty much all the songs are written by Steve. There's a co-write on Twilight Zone with Dave, and I believe Deano gets a co-write on Killers. But
mm,
for the most part, this is like a Steve album. But yeah, the bass intro is fantastic, so cool. I like the fact that there's just a verse and a chorus, and then they go into the guitar solo and like the riffs and the riff changes and everything instead of the standard verse chorus. It's like verse
mm,
chorus, then into these sections. I love those bass fills that Steve is doing in the guitar solo. Underneath the guitar solo, so cool. Classic Steve Harris, signature Steve Harris. The guitar solos in this are great.
mm,
Paul's delivery is fantastic. Born to do a
mm,
scene. Agnes agreed. This is like Paul's money zone, this kind of
mm,
tough vocal. Paul does this
mm,
very, very well. And yeah, so it's a song. If they never played it again live, I'd be perfectly fine with it. It's a song that there are no live versions that I like better than the studio version. It's a song that has some burnout factor around it. But when I'm listening to this record, I never skip it because Ides of March into Wrathchild. You mentioned earlier Jonathan saying that this is like a Jonathan from Maiden A to Z a podcast commenting that this is kind of like a live show. And you're right. Ides of March is the intro tape. The
mm,
band then comes roaring out with the bass and the drums and Wrathchild and the whole band kicking in. And it's not a
mm,
very long song either. So it kind of has this, let me see, it's 2 minutes and 54 seconds. I mean,
mm,
it's a short song, but it packs a lot of punch. There's a lot of different sections in it. Da 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 da. It's got a lot in it, and it just moves very quickly. It's sort of like a left hook or something coming at you. It just doesn't mess around. It just comes right out swinging. There's no wasted time. It gets right to it, and it packs a lot in 2 minutes and 54 seconds. So love it.
Mm.
Great classic, legendary Iron Maiden song.
It is indeed. Actually, it's one of the first Iron Maiden songs ever written, and the history of the song goes back even to 1975. And according to Luis Mariano Rodriguez, it was actually performed on the very first gig as Iron Maiden. Uh, I more or less agree with you. The burnout factor is strong. But as I was today, I was preparing for this episode and I was listening to the album, and I wrote one thing in my notes, and it says hi-hats.
Yeah.
I mean, clyburst, hi-hats,
Yeah.
and it's one hand. It's a,
Yeah.
I mean, it's one hand at that speed. That's
Wow.
high. That's how you should play hi-hat.
Yeah.
Everyone, if you can't do that, walk away from the drum kit. Well, not
Yeah.
really, but yeah. As you say, it's a great song, and I really enjoyed this version. And I'm glad they re-recorded it uh, from as we discussed in the previous episode. They did this song for the Metal for Mothers album, but this version is so much better. And like you say, Paul's performance is great, and the solos, the short solos that are sort of bookending the verses are Adrian, and the main solo is Dave, and all of them are great. There is actually quite weird. There's a version from '99 uh, that was put out as a sort of promo, and it was on the US version of the Ed Hunter compilation slash video game. And it's a version where Bruce is singing over the original tracks from the Killer's session. And it was, of course, then mixed by Kevin Shirley. But if you go out looking for Rothschild 99, there is a promo version of that song, which is, of course, not as good as the Paul Diano one, but it's a nice one. Yeah,
Interesting. Okay.
Murders in the
Murders.
Rue Morgue.
Yeah. Murders in the Rue Morgue. I remember the intro with the bass playing harmonics and playing that melodic line, do 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 do.
Mm,
And then the way this whole thing builds, it very much reminds me of Ides of March. And in a way, I always felt like they could have separated this intro from the song if they wanted to. If they wanted to call it something else, it would have worked. But I like the dramatic way that this builds. It's very similar to Ides of March into Wrathchild. Kind of starts off quiet, the bass playing that melody, everything builds up. There's sort of this melodic theme, then everything drops down in that fast snare drum roll. Paul here again doing another thing he does very well, which is spitting out a lot of lyrics.
mm,
This is something I think Steve would become famous for. Steve not really being a vocalist. You get the impression that he just writes his stuff out and then he hands it to the singer, and it's like, okay, you figure out how to get all these words into that tiny amount of space. But Paul
yeah.
does a great job here. We keep mentioning the great podcast Made in A to Z. I was a guest on there. Made in A to Z goes through every Iron Maiden song in alphabetical order. Each episode is one or
Mm,
two songs. And both Matthias and I have been on the podcast a few times.
mm,
And I did an episode on Murders in the Rue Morgue. And we talked about how it was cool, how there's kind of a story to it here. This guy is kind of a maybe he has a split personality. There's somebody murdering women. He doesn't think it's him, but the police are chasing him and everything. So I think it's
mm,
cool that it has kind of this storytelling thing to the lyrics. There's a lot of lyrics in the song. The spot that, of course, jumps out in the lyrics is "Someone call the Jardins."
mm.
As a 12 to 13-year-old kid, you're like, what does this mean? It's just that always stuck out at me. I guess that's the word for the French police. Uh,
Yeah, gendarme. Yeah. Mm,
yeah. So yeah, it's a great song. I love the way it builds. I love the storytelling nature of it. I love the changes. That
Mm.
spot is really great. They're just at this point in Iron Maiden, they're doing a very good job of nothing overstays its welcome here as far as riffs. You're never sitting there going like, "Oh man, how many more times are they going to play this riff?" It's like it's almost the reverse. It's like, "Oh man, I got to rewind to listen to that riff again because they only play it for eight
Mm.
measures or whatever." They're very economical with their riffs here, and thus it's very effective. I mean, we mentioned Wrathchild is under 3 minutes. This is, of course, longer. It clocks in at 4 minutes, 14 seconds. And this one for me there's a lot of riffs in it. There's a lot of very cool riffs in it, but this one is very much carried by the lyric and the storytelling nature of the song. So yeah, very strong start to the album here. Another song that I really like.
Mm. It's for sure one of the highlights for me on the album. Like we said, it's a Steve song, and this is one of only three new songs actually on the album. So, and I think you can tell that this is like a new a new way of songwriting for Steve Harris. It's more advanced. The lyrics are more thought out and, dare I say, more well written. The lyrics is inspired, of course, by the Alan Edgar Poe novel with the same name. And just like you say, it's th- when I think of it, it's for me, it has always been like the opening track for the album. It's like, of course, you can't put ISO March anywhere else on the album. Thunderburst on the Samson album is opening up for side B, which I guess Maiden could have done that too. But I think that Murders in the Rue Morgue is like it's sort of made to be an opening track,
Yeah,
but it's not. It's a third song on the album.
yeah,
So for me, the album sort of starts over a bit when you get into, like you say, the harmonics and the build up of the intro of the song Murders in the Rue Morgue, and then it just kicks off. And of course, I think that in hindsight, Maiden sort of proves me right because on the following tour, when the Beast on the Road tour for A Number of the Beast, they indeed used Murders in the Rue Morgue as the opening song of the album, as they didn't play Invaders on that tour.
yeah.
Uh,
And they
but
would play the intro as a taped intro, right?
yeah,
If I remember correctly, the intro to Murders in the Moon was taped, and the band would come running out on stage with that fast snare drum roll.
yeah,
And when the whole thing kicked in, they're sort of reinforcing this idea that the intro to this song could have almost have been separated. It functions very much like an opening track.
indeed. Like I said, I think this is a great one, and it's all. I don't know if you try to play it on bass, but it's very enjoyable to play on the bass. It just sits so nicely to play it with your hands. I really enjoyed this song in more than one aspect. Okay, Another Life then. What do you think?
All right, Another Life. Okay, this is one of those again, kind of like deep cut songs. And as I'm sitting here, I have the album lyrics pulled up, and there's almost no lyrics to this song, unless this is a misprint. It just says to repeat the lyrics, which is what he does. The whole "as I lay here lying on my bed, sweet voices come." Uh, so yeah, it's kind of it, again at the time when I got this album, a song like this didn't really stick that much with me because it lacks sort of that big chorus, Wrathchild, or Murders in the Rue Morgue.
Hmm.
There really is no chorus to this. It's a
No,
verse, and it's two verses that are the same verse. So it does have that kind of. I'm not exactly sure what they were going for with this. It's not particularly long, 3 minutes 22 seconds. After not factoring in the instrumentals, it is, it's one of the shorter songs on the record. It's not a bad song. I do kind of like the riff and feel of it, but maybe again, this is sort of that rushed second album, sophomore album thing. Maybe it's a little bit undercooked. It's a little underbaked. It could have been expanded a little bit, but the germ of a good song is here. It's still I still like it and enjoy it, but there's just not a lot of meat on the bones on this particular one.
No, it's not. And in fact, it's not only two times, it's repeated three times throughout the
Whoa.
song. And I think being fair and a bit critical here, I think that is one of the problems with the album is that this song, Another Life, uh, was indeed a very old song. Again, it's a song from 1975. What it sounded like back then, we don't know, of course, because I have never heard any older recordings of Another Life. But they bring this song out and they start to play it again during gigs in 1980, both with Dennis Stratton and later for that autumn tour that they did with Adrian in November 1980. It was always the package with this song was always a drum solo of Clive Burr.
Yeah.
So the song would go into a drum solo, and then it would go back to like repeating of that verse one more time, a third time. Uh, and I totally agree with you. It's perhaps I would say even like my least favorite song on the album. I like the feel of it. I like the inten the intensity and the energy,
Hmm.
but it's not like if the song was written in 1975, couldn't Steve have found some more time to maybe write a verse or two
Yeah.
before they decided to record it for the Killers album? It just it's a bit poor in that sense, I think.
Yeah, it sounds like a classic, like an early song that he wrote. They used to play it live. They get to the second record. Again, got your whole life to write the first record. You got 6 months to write the second record. They've got to put songs on here. He dips back to this and pulls us out where a couple more stronger songs, and this would have been one of those songs, like it would have been a trivia song. It would have been like a song that there's bootleg versions of them playing it live in 77
Yeah,
or something like that. And it would have just stayed there because again, it's like you said, the feel of it is pretty cool. It's a pretty cool idea, but it just doesn't seem like it's ever particularly worked out or something.
no,
It
they
never
they
completed, like it's incomplete.
they did perform this live in '05 on the Early Days tour, and I mean for Iron Maiden that must be considering their set lists throughout the years that it's probably like the most deep cut song they've ever picked up. I mean, so many years later to perform, and I mean, I was totally delighted to hear such a deep cut done live. But all the same, Another Life, maybe maybe the weakest song on Killers for me. Um, uh, yeah, I don't think it's not so much to say about it because of the way it is. It just repeats over and over a few
Yeah.
times, and then it stops.
Yeah.
So the next one on the album is Genghis Khan, which is another instrumental track written by Steve.
Yeah, I like this. I like when Iron Maiden does instrumentals. I wish they would return to this. The tempo changes in this one, I think, are when I think of Genghis Khan, I think of that super fast gear shift tempo change. And
Yeah,
I've often say that I love the expression I use is gear shift tempo changes. You're sort of cruising along at one speed, and then all of a sudden you shift gears and it just jumps up to another level or it jumps down. And this is sort of a classic example of this. It's got a cool vibe to it. I like Maiden instrumentals. I know some people are not fans of instrumentals. Maybe it's a bit much putting it on this side of the record, being that, what are we? This is the fourth song on the album. We are, if you include Ides of March, one, two, three, yeah, four. No, this would be the fifth song. So
Mm.
really only like four songs back we had an instrumental. And again, Murders in the Rue Morgue. The intro kind of sounds like an instrumental.
Mm.
So yeah, I mean it's cool. And I really like it because of the chopsy nature of it, the band kind of showing off their speed and everything like that. And it's not too long. It doesn't overstay its welcome here. It's 3 minutes, 2 seconds. But again, maybe I would have bumped this to side two. But as
Mm.
it stands, I like it. I think it's fun. I think it's cool. I like the main guitar themes. I like the way it sort of ends, the way everything sort of breaks down at the end, and you get that like sort of strummed guitar, picked
Yeah.
guitar chord at the end there. So yeah, it's cool. I'm okay with it.
Yeah, I also enjoy Genghis Khan a lot, actually. And I think it's just like you, we agree too much, John. I think we, we should have like different opinions on things just for the dramatic effect. Anyway, Genghis Khan for me is like a song that I know I enjoyed very early on. Even as a kid, I thought it was great. And just like you, what you call the gear shift is so cool.
Yeah.
It just goes super fast. And I mean, I, I would guess that that section in itself was to be like an inspiration for speed metal bands
Yeah,
of the 80s. Like if there's you can single out just a minute of a song that sort of changes the the history of rock music. I think that gear shift going into that very fast part of the song is one of the, I mean, that part, the song Purgatory, which we will talk on about later, and Accept, I think are to blame for all the
yeah,
German speed metal bands of the 80s, like Halloween and so on. I just love it. And I think the end part with the guitar harmony and the like the call and response
yeah,
do 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 do
yeah,
do 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 do. It's so beautiful
yeah,
and it's so short that you almost sort of wish for that they had molded this into something bigger and grander. It feels like they're just throwing like pearls for swines. It's so it, it's it's in a way it almost feels like it's a wasted opportunity. That end section is so
yeah.
much quality that it feels like oh they could have
Done something
oh
with, yeah,
but I mean like you said on some of the previous songs it's so short that when you want to go back and you listen to it again
yeah.
it does not stay out its welcome any anyway liksom. So I really like this song.
And the fast
uh
section, what I like about the fast section is it's not like a typical thing where they're playing fast, but it's just like a jugga 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 jugga, chugging on a chord.
mm,
It's actually moving around, so it's very kind of proggish.
um
It gives it a very like
yeah.
chopsy, proggish feel to it rather than it just like fast as a shark, except where they're just sort of
Mm.
locking in on one riff or something like that. But okay, Innocent Exile, yet another
Mm.
Steve Harris here. Cool bass intro. I like the feel of the verses. I like the lyrics. My life is so empty, nothing to live for. My mind is all confusion because I defied the law. So I think the lyrics are cool on this. I like the feel of the song. I like when everything sort of breaks down and the drums. You talk about the hi-hats, him like going really
Mm.
fast underneath, and when that intro comes back in, except Kali's playing underneath him with the hi-hats, like really fast and now again more. Again, I didn't think of this really until we started talking about this, but 3 minutes 22 seconds for, or no, I'm sorry. Innocent Exile is 3 minutes 50 seconds. So still, it's not a long song, but there's a lot in it. And I know Steve, of course, rejects this any idea that punk had any influence at all on, has zero influence on Iron Maiden. And I do believe he's being sincere with that. But there is something to be said about the economical nature of Iron Maiden at this point, how they're very to the point. They don't linger too long on any particular thing. They throw these riffs out at you, these tempo changes in these riffs, and they're here and they're gone. It's just like they jab you with it, and then they're moving on to the next thing. And being where Maiden stands now, when we get to the what I like to refer to as the return of Bruce era of the band, you're going to hear me complain quite often about the modern era of Iron Maiden, very much in need of some editing and trimming, and compacting things more. And I wish that they could maybe go back in time and listen to this and see, because this is very much what they're doing here. They're getting in, they're getting out, they're hitting you between the eyes. They're not they're not wasting time with big jam sessions or anything like that. It's really coming at you pretty hard, and it creates that effect of I want to go back and listen to it again. Oh man, I want to hear that riff that came in just that one spot. I got to rewind. I got to rewind to hear that riff again. So yeah, this is a cool one. I like the verse, the bouncy feel of the verse. I love like Paul's delivery in it. I like the bass in it, and just the overall the tempo changes and everything. So yeah, it's a cool one.
Innocent Exile is an even older song, actually, from the beginning. It was performed by Steve's first band, Influence. And it changed name a few times. At first, it was called The Pit. And then they played it with Gypsy's Kiss, the band he was in after Influence, or it turned into rather. And then it was called Endless Pit. And then they played it with Smiler, the like the blues boogie band he was in before starting Maiden. And then it was called Innocence in Exile, according to Luis Mariano Rodriguez's book. It would be so interesting to hear what these very, very early versions of this song sounded like. According to Steve, the first, the bass intro was originally played on a guitar, and then when they started to play it with Iron Maiden, he switched it around and he played that on the bass instead. And supposedly the main riff of the song, that do 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 do, was written by one of his mates that he played with called Dave Smith, and that was in Influence. I really like the song. We've done this song live as a bonus encore with my band, Dead Cosmonaut. And we've also done Killers. So maybe we should just do like a full Dead Cosmonaut recording of the Killers album.
Yeah.
We are on our way now. So Innocent Exile, this song was also performed a few times in 1980 with Dennis Stratton. There is one bootleg with Maiden performing their first gig outside of England. This was in Belgium in April 1980. So you can listen to an earlier version of Innocent Exile with Dennis Stratton on guitar. And actually, talking about all these connections and the small world, is that when they traveled to that gig in Belgium to play their first gig outside of England, that was the first time that they met Nico McBrain. And he was playing this festival in Belgium with a band called McKitty. I have tried to find some information about this band McKitty, and I've heard Nico mentioning McKitty, but as far as I have been able to find out, and I asked my friend Henrik Johansson, who is also a Maiden researcher. He says there is no official recordings of that band, but I mean, it's again the small world. This is in '80, and they meet Nico McBrain. So I like that. It's information like that is like golden nuggets for me. But I really like the song in itself. I think Innocent Exile is a great one, and I think it's if you were you talked earlier about this, that you have like a whole lifetime to write the songs for your first album, and then you don't have as much time. But I have to contradict you a bit now, but because with Killers, it's actually what they have done. There are only 3 new songs on the album, so
Yeah.
both the first and the second album was sort of done all that period leading up to the actual recording of it. You could argue, and I would say that many of these, or not many, correct, some of these songs, like you said about Another Life, isn't that good and could have, it wasn't fit for the first album, and maybe in hindsight it wasn't actually fit for the second album either. But with Innocent Exile, I think it deserves its spot. And it was a song that they did live at the time uh, back then. I
Yeah.
really like Innocent Exile.
Okay, side two opens with Killers. This has yet another bass intro,
Mm.
another kind of Steve bouncing off of his open E string here. Very, very cool. Kind of builds up in intensity to a certain degree, much like Murders in the Rue Morgue did, but it kind of gets right to the main riff pretty quickly. I like the fast tempo. I like the guitars doing that, moving their hands down the string, hitting the harmonics. That
Yeah.
thing is, that's very cool. Yeah, the guitar solos in this one too, I really enjoy. I think the guitar solos are great. But yeah, overall, it's a cool one. It's another one when I think of this record. Uh, I think of Wrathchild, Murders in the Rue Morgue, and Killers. These were the three that jumped out at me when I was younger. Uh, cool lyrics, I guess. You walk through the subway, his eyes burn a hole in your back. Again, Paul sort of spitting out the lyrics with some venom on his voice. Yeah, cool song. I like it. I think it's a good opener to side two also.
Yeah, I think it's one of the absolute Maiden classics, and it is one of the few songs that they have picked up from time to play. Not as much as I would like to. I mean, Rothschild is a song that they throw in the set, literally on every tour, more or less. But Killers is, I think, a much more interesting, fun song. Killers was one of the new songs. They started to rehearse that when Dennis and Clive was in the band, and according to former Iron Maiden roadie Loopy Newhouse, he was the one who, on a rehearsal, suggested that, because apparently Steve had like these 2 different parts. The intro part was one part that they rehearsed and played, and then he had like the main song Killers. But it was Loopy who said, "Why don't you put that intro bit on the song Killers and make it an intro for the song?" And of course, that was a huge contribution to the history of rock, if you ask me. um, you talk about the lyrics; they were written by Paul Diano, and his vocal performance on Killers. And by Killers, I mean the album Killers is his highlight, the highlight of his career. And he spoke in interviews later that Martin Birch sort of was the key to unlock his full capacity, and he learned some tricks, and he was given some ideas that he Paul himself said that he continued to use throughout his career. On the song "Killers," I think I mentioned when we talked about Paul on the previous episode that he had that quality of danger, that he would sound like a dangerous person. And on this song "Killers," for sure, his vocal delivery is menacing. I think it's a great one. They he changed the lyrics quite a bit. There are earlier recordings, and if you, I think there is in the box set they had I think it's called Eddie's Archive. There is this CD called BBC
Hmm.
sessions or something like that, and the recording from 1980 of from the Reading Festival has a different set of lyrics. If you listen to the version that they recorded for the Live at the Rainbow video, that version also has a different set of lyrics,
Hmm.
which is very interesting because Live at the Rainbow was recorded during mid session of the recording of the Killers album. So that means that they must have recorded the song Killers after the 21st of December 1980, because that was the date they recorded the live show. So he apparently he was changing the lyrics even as they were in the studio. So that's a fun game if you track up some bootlegs, and even though those, like I mentioned, official releases, there are different versions of Killers. Uh, and I have to totally agree with you. The two solos, it's Dave, and then it goes into Adrian, and the way that Adrian sort of is like a counter movement even to what
Hmm.
Dave played is it's so good. It just gives me goosebumps when I hear that every time. It's fun to play too. Like I said, we've done this song as encores for Dead Cosmonaut, and it's very very fun song to play. I totally loved it. I hope this is one of the tracks they will bring back for the coming tour, Run for Your Lives, where they say they're going to play songs from 1980 to 92. I really hope they bring out Killers again. I love this
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, it should be noted that this is the only writing credit that Deano gets on this record as a co-write
Yeah,
with Steve
yeah,
Harris. And I like that the part in the beginning too when he's doing like the yeah, yeah, with the
mm,
hits with the drums and everything. That's great. But okay, now next is Twilight Zone. So on the the North American edition, we get Twilight Zone next. And Twilight Zone is a co-write with Steve and Dave Murray. It only clocks in at 2 minutes and 33 seconds. The only thing shorter on the album is the Ides of March intro. Wrathchild is 2:54. This is 2:33. Uh, I don't particularly like this main riff. It sounds too rock and roll, boogie rock to me. Do 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 do. Almost like a status quo thing or something. So I don't really care for that. I do think the subject matter is kind of cool. He sings the line, Because you see, I can't take no shape nor form. It's been 3 long years since I've been gone." Sort of this guy afterlife type of thing. I do think that that's pretty cool. I do like the guitar melodies in the middle instrumental section, the way they keep kind of climbing up the neck. I think that's pretty cool. And there's some nice overall harmonies in the song. But again, it has this kind of like rock feel to it or something that I just and the way the verse melody line is very like she lays in bed at night, sending my call. It's just kind of like very rock and roll, and yeah, it's not a favorite for me. I think it's kind of forgettable. It falls into that category of Sanctuary for me. I don't like when Maiden does like rock type songs. it doesn't, I don't know. I just don't like them doing that. And I can see how stuff like this probably really went over in the club days, stuff like Sanctuary, and we're going to talk about Drifter in a little bit, but I'm glad that they sort of got away from that as time goes on, because this just kind of to me just feels like kind of rock and roll, heavy rock or something, and it just doesn't. I don't really care for it. Not a terrible song, but it's not a favorite on this album.
Finally, we disagree on something because I think this song is just great, actually. I love this song. Like I mentioned, like you said, it's not on the European versions of the. And I bought this. I would guess. I think I got the single around 87, 88 or something. Uh, and for me, that was like a new Maiden song. Just like you say, it is a shuffle. It's a boogie sort, but it's a heavy metal boogie. At least the way they play it. The tempo is perhaps a bit too fast for comfort, but the energy is just great. And again, I think that Paul's performance, this is not an easy song to sing, but I think he does it with great effect. I really like this song. Apparently, according to Adrian in an interview, he said that it's Adrian who came up with the midsection, like you said, with the harmonies and the climbing melodies that just goes. And
Hmm.
apparently, that was something that Adrian came up with as they was working the song. The main riff is Dave Murray, and it's a co-write between Dave and Steve, and again, now a hidden credit for Adrian Smith, because I would say writing that part for Twilight Zone is indeed
Significant.
songwriting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's songwriting for sure. I really like this one. It's very very short, and this was a song that they played live. It was in their set. Uh, I like it. I enjoy Twilight Zone a lot. And talking about that, it was on the Japanese version. Uh, Now if you're listening, you can't really see this. I guess this is the Japanese version of Killers, and there's this piece of paper which is called an obi, which means like a belt, I think, in Japanese. And if I show you the back side, the thing is I can't remove this obi. It's so tight that I can't move it. But if you look here where I have my finger, if you're watching now on YouTube, it says details of Twilight Zone. So on the Japanese version, the song Twilight Zone was named Details of Twilight Zone. Why is that, you might ask? That's really weird. The backstory is that apparently they sent like a text message, telex, or I don't know if you had like what
Fax.
means of,
We would say a
yeah,
fax.
fax,
Yeah.
yeah. And the headline of the fax said details of Twilight Zone, which meant they presented like songwriting credits,
Yeah.
production credits, engineering credits, and so on. But somehow they thought that details of Twilight Zone was the actual name of the song Twilight Zone, and so that is quite funny. But it's only known as details of Twilight Zone in Japan, not in any other
Interesting.
parts of the world.
Yeah.
But again, I really enjoy this song. I think Twilight Zone is, if they brought out the song like Twilight Zone for as a deep cut, I would go bananas. Absolutely.
We'll agree to disagree on that one.
Yeah, finally.
All right, Prodigal Son. Okay, this is a really interesting song and a song that I like to go back and listen to because there's a lot of great bass playing from Steve on this. And it's maybe the oddest song from the Paul Diano era in that it doesn't sound really like anything else. It's got these strumming acoustic guitars. It starts off with this very major key sounding. it has a progressive Jethro Tull vibe to it for me.
Mm.
I mentioned the 6/8 kind of rolling feel to the song. Of course, the lyric that jumps out at you is the "Oh Lamia, please." Lamia, I guess, is I looked this up is like a mythical, like a monster type of thing. Uh, the little break in the verses I think is really cool. But da 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 da, where like the drums drop out and just the bass and the guitar play that little break that comes in the middle of the verses. I think that's really cool. Uh, I love when everything sort of drops down and there's that melodic guitar solo and the drums are sort of playing loose underneath it, and eventually the band comes in and it has like a trippy feel to it too, and it
Mm.
kind of makes me wish if Iron Maiden had done an album of stuff like this, acoustic stuff, trippy, proggy, psych sounding, weird, kind of different type of stuff. I think it would be something that would be very, very interesting. Not to jump too far ahead in time, but when Steve announced British Lion, in my mind, was thinking that it was going to be stuff like this. Very Jethro
Mm.
Tull like, very Wishbone
Mm.
Ash like acoustic guitars and strumming different rhythms and just different, you know. So this is a very sort of I think when I first heard it, I didn't know what to make of it because it doesn't sound like Iron Maiden. If you just
Mm.
played this intro to this song to somebody, they probably who'd never heard this before but had heard other Iron Maiden stuff, they probably wouldn't guess that this was Iron Maiden. So it's just sort of
No.
this weird, strange song, but I really dig it because it's just got a lot of kind of cool stuff going on in it. And it's also Paul singing. And we mentioned this on the first album, like with Strange World, and that Paul has this aspect to his singing, this sort of clean, uh, melodic style to his voice. Now he doesn't have a
Mm.
huge vocal range, but I think he sounds good here.
Mm.
And I kind of appreciate the fact that this song is different. Paul's vocal styling on this is different, and I think it's kind of cool. And it kind of makes me wish that maybe if they had done a few more things like this, I think it could have been really cool.
Mm. I think the only other song in the Maiden catalog that is sort of the same or in this style is the song Journeyman on Dance of Death. But like you say, it's a unique track, and I would even go as far as say it. This is one of my favorite Iron Maiden songs.
Yeah.
This is one of my favorite songs in life. I think this is amazing. It's unique. Um, I really enjoy it, and it's again many of the other songs sort of display Kleiber's playing very aggressively,
Hmm.
driving, and here he has to sort of pull back a bit. And even though the drum track is for a the drum track for a mellow song like this is quite intense, I think still it displays another quality to Kleiber's playing. Paul's vocals is great. Adrian himself has talked about in interviews that the first solo that we hear is Adrian Smith.
Hmm.
And this was one of his favorite Iron Maiden solos for a long time. And getting into Maiden, doing like rhythm, harmony, and lead stuff was like out of his comfort zone. He's talked about this. And of course, going into the studio with Martin Birch was also like a huge thing, and it added a lot of pressure on him. He said something like this, that Martin was the guy who had worked with Richie Blackmore, and
Hmm.
now little Adrian Smith is going to to impress. What can Adrian Smith do to impress someone like Martin Birch? Of course, I don't think that Martin Birch is the guy that you have to sort of impress, but nevertheless, Adrian solo was like one of the first times that, according to Adrian himself, where he had an idea and could actually pull off doing what he set out to do.
Hmm.
And that recording this solo on Prodigal Son gave him sort of a confidence boost, so to speak, to like, okay, I can do this. I can be a lead player. I can make I have my own style, so to speak. And I think it's one of Adrian's, yeah, top 10 solos, even something like that. Um, According to Nico, this song was also rehearsed for the early days tour in '05, but for some
Wow.
reason they didn't play it. Perhaps they choose to play Another Life instead, and all the worse for
Yeah.
us, if you ask me. But I think again, if they bring out a song like Prodigal Son, I would shit my pants, I guess.
Yeah, and it's almost like in an alternate universe, if this song, imagine if this song was a single and it became a huge, huge hit for them, you could
Mm,
almost see them going more in this direction.
mm,
Uh, because again, when I hear this, I hear Steve's influences, I hear Genesis, I hear Wishbone Ash, I hear Jethro
yeah, yeah.
Tull, that whole
Mm,
like 70s sound. So you could really picture it's kind of like a what if. What if Iron Maiden went in this direction,
mm,
Prodigal Son direction? I mean, maybe it wouldn't have worked, and maybe the reason why it works is because it's so different from everything else. So yeah, it's definitely a song that uh, just stands out as sort of this. It's over in the other side of the room from Iron Maiden, all the other
yeah.
songs because it's so different, but it's really really cool and it's a really enjoyable song.
And I think that the album desperately needs a song like Prodigal Son too, because like we mentioned before, the album is very like club gig
Yeah.
rock, hard driving rock, high energy sort of songs. So for the dramatic scope of the album, a song like Prodigal Sons just makes the whole album more complete. I forgot to mention that the very origin of this song is a bit cloudy. Uh, you We think, when I say we, I once again mean Luis Mariano Rodriguez, that this song was perhaps written in the later part of '77 or early '78. And this is actually one of the songs where former singer Dennis Wilcock claimed to have written the lyrics for. And time wise, he was indeed in the band at that time when there are supposedly live recordings. Not that I've heard these, but there are like the secret inner circle of Maiden tape traders, and apparently there are copies of this song somewhere out in these
Mm.
clandestine secret circles. I would, of course, love to hear an early version of this song, but yeah, Prodigal Son, love it to bits.
Awesome.
And
Well,
I mean, actually, you have Prodigal Son, and then talking about a gear shift, you go
yeah,
into Purgatory.
Purgatory. Right,
Yeah,
which is an over the top kind of blaster. Uh and I think uh it works well because again, you're coming out of Prodigal Son, which has this very relaxed kind of feel, and all of a sudden Purgatory then is this over the top, high energy, pushing it to the max type of thing. Paul spitting out the lyrics like he does so well. I do like the chorus. Oh, another time, another place, another smile on another face. Can't you see me walking up? This is where I mentioned it. Some of these things, some of the other songs maybe lack catchy choruses, but I think that this one has that. So I think that that's pretty cool. So I've always liked Purgatory. I think it's for the energy, for the way it flows after Prodigal Son and Paul's delivery and everything. So yeah, Purgatory is a cool one.
yeah. This is also one of my favorite songs on the album. I think Purgatory is just a great song. And this is also an old song. It was first performed in 1976, and there are actually live like a short snippet of a live version recorded, I think, in 77, 78, which should have Thunderstick, the aforementioned
Oh, wow.
Thunderstick on drums. But it's not a complete song. It's like a minute or something like that of the song. And when you listen to that version, it's indeed very different. It's very much slower, and I would say it's even a groovy song. It's
Wow.
sort of uh, yeah. I mean, the transformation from that version into the Killers version is, I don't think you could have thought that out. And it would be interesting indeed to hear what made them do that transition, because it's like another type. You can hear the chords, you can hear the words, and the vocal melodies and so on. But the Killers version is so much in your face. And like I said before, I think that this song on its own is perhaps responsible for all the speed metal that came afterward, with all the guitars playing. I just think it's a great one. Originally, it was called Floating, and I mean they do sing floating. As you see me floating up beside you,
Yeah.
get this feeling that all my love's inside of you. Uh, the lyric itself is quite trippy, and it's a great contrast to the very high energy, energetic music. So again, Purgatory, great one. Really, really like that one.
Okay, and then the album closes with Drifter. Drifter occupies the same space for me as Sanctuary. I
Mm.
like the intro to Drifter. I think that's pretty cool, and it's kind of sets itself up like it's going to be kind of dark and heavy. But man, the verse lyrics in this, looking out, baby, won't you take me away? Sitting here, it's gonna be a new day. It's way too rock and roll, way too sing-songy. I hate the verses in this. And again, it has that same thing with Sanctuary. I'd say I like Sanctuary better than I like Drifter. There's just sort of this bar club feel to it. And Iron Maiden, after coming off of Prodigal Son and Murders in the Rue Morgue and Genghis Khan and all this other stuff, it's just it ends on this. And this is just to me just sounds like I'm sure this went over very well in the live setting with the band because again, it has a very sort of pub rock vibe to it, but it's just forgettable. I think it takes the album out on it kind of a disappointing, forgettable note for me. It's again, it's another one that should have been left. It should have been left for the live tape collectors, live show collectors. It just doesn't work for me. But I do like that intro. I think the intro is very, very cool, that chord sequence, but it's the verse that just does it in for me. I hate the way Paul's singing in these verses, and these lyrics are just like look out now, baby, won't you take me away? Sitting here, it's gonna be a new day. Gotta sing my song and I can't go wrong. Gotta keep on roaming, gonna sing my song. What you feeling when you hold me tight? I mean, these lyrics are terrible. I'm gonna cuddle up with you tonight. If I told you Iron Maiden, that should be a trivia thing. When has Iron Maiden used the word cuddle? I'm gonna cuddle up with you tonight. Gonna make you feeling so secure. Listen, child, don't you see this cure? I mean, it's just terrible. These might be some of the worst Iron Maiden lyrics out there. It's so as I said that Prodigal Son showed a direction that Iron Maiden could have gone that I thought would have
Mm.
been very interesting, a very Genesis, Jethro Tull, prog-ish direction. This shows the flip side of that. Iron Maiden could have gone down this path of like dumb lyrics, sing along, live setting, boogie rock, rock and roll, hey, 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 sing along type of things. And it would have been for the worst for sure if they had gone in this direction. But yeah, I don't like this song. It's probably if I made a top 10 least favorite Iron Maiden songs, this might crack my top five. I hate the melody that Paul sings in this verse. It just sounds goofy and silly to me. And it's just a bummer that this comes. This should have been a B-side or something. It's just a bummer that the album ends on this. All this cool stuff going on this record. Them pushing themselves, Genghis Khan, Killers, pushing the tempos, Purgatory, the way they're really trying to take it to the next level. And then this is like they just jump back to, I don't know what,
Mm.
mid 70s forgettable rock.
Yeah, it is indeed one of the oldest songs of Iron Maiden, and it was also played on the very first gig of the band. So Steve probably wrote this back in 1974, even. So it is a very, and I mean, maybe that could excuse his rock and roll good time feeling theme of the lyrics. Uh, this song was also released earlier. There are at least two different live versions recorded on two different dates, but in the same venue of the Marquee Club in London, that were put out as B-sides. And as we talked about in the previous episode, it was the B-side for the Sanctuary single, and it was also released. Another live version was released on a Japanese EP called Live Plus One, and that was also recorded on the Marquee. This song was indeed regularly played on gigs through the 70s and in the 80s, and it was the closing encore on gigs when they toured for the first album. So again, like I said before, this is one of the songs that maybe the critics of the time thought that we've heard this before. Why do you put out this song? And even though I don't have such strong dislike as you, I probably am a bit neutral to it. I I think the reason why they recorded this and put it last on the album is just because of that it was the last track of that gig. And
Hmm.
like Jonathan said, this if this album is the club gig, of course they go out on
An
Drifter.
encore. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I can see the reasons why, but just like you, I agree. It could have been one of these songs that was just like a B-side, like these live versions that they recorded for the previous singles and so on. But yeah, I don't have any strong feelings. And talking about the lyrics in Drifter, Purgatory, Innocent Exile, and Another Life all have repeating verses. And
Yeah.
like we said when we talked about Another Life, that in that song they repeat the same thing three times. For Innocent Exile, Purgatory, and Drifter, it's only two times they repeat verses over and over again. And again, like I said before, I think that is one of the. It makes the album a bit poorer. I think it's uh, they could have just written a new verse
Yeah.
if you going into the studio. And I mean, even you're going into the studio to record an album with Martin Birch.
Yeah. Well,
Maybe they
again,
should
it
have.
it sort of reaffirms the that this there was a rushed nature to it. And even though a lot of these songs were leftover songs that have been sitting around for years, they
Mm,
probably maybe they thought they would never use these songs because they were slightly underbaked. But then they get into the studio and they're like, "Oh, gee, we need more songs. Let's just go back and let's just pull out some of the stuff from the club days, Drifter and some of the other things, Another Life, from the early days like that."
mm,
And to me, again, that even though these songs have been sitting around a while, the fact that they just didn't polish them up and finish out the lyrics and stuff like that, just to me gives the album, like you said, that feel that maybe there was sort of a rushed nature to this record.
yeah. But again, I don't think it's that bad. It's definitely not on my least favorite Maiden song list. Not that I have one when I think of it, but I don't think this song would be on that list.
I guess I would say from the classic era, it would
Yeah,
be a least favorite if I factored in, of course, like the Blaze and the modern era. This there'd be songs that I like less than this, but
I think we should talk about the singles a bit. And there's not much to talk about when it comes to the actual songs on the albums, but I think we should mention Twilight Zone. Uh, if you're watching on YouTube, I am now holding up the 12-inch German maxi single version. It was also put out in the UK on already back then in 1981. It was on multiple vinyls. It was on what do you say, transparent,
mhm.
see-through. It was on red and on black vinyl,
Mhm.
but all on 7-inch. And like you said, it was a double A side single with the song Rothschild, and Rothschild was a video that I think was on like MTV or something like that. This is a fun another fun Derek Riggs sleeve with loads of tiny details, and like the lyrics is about someone who is have died like 3 years ago and is trying to get in touch with his former girlfriend, who is on display here on the cover of the Twilight Zone single. And that was put out in March of 1981. They also put out a single for the song Purgatory. And the B-side for that one was Genghis Khan. So, I mean, there's literally nothing to say about these songs. But I think this is a very striking cover. It's sort of, no pun intended, but it's very in your face.
Mhm.
And apparently, according to Derek Riggs, the face of, and in case you haven't seen this single sleeve, the face is of the devil breaking into pieces, and underneath the devil, behind the devil, is of course Eddie. And the face of the devil here was based on Salvador Dali, the very famous painter. And the cunning thing that I didn't really think about when I was a kid, as a kid, I thought this was scary. Actually, I thought this was a scary image of the devil turning into Eddie. The concept behind it is quite funny, because in those parts where you can see Eddie is actually like the shadows. If you imagine a light on the face of the devil, the parts where you can see Eddie in the cracks, so to speak, of the devil's face is also in the shadows of the where the light comes from in the image. And I think that's a very, very cunning move. Actually, that's great. And this wasn't, according to the story goes, that when Rod Smallwood saw the original painting for the single Purgatory, he said, "That's too good. We keep that." And he asked Derek to make another one, and that turned out to be the what we now have for Purgatory. And the picture that he thought was too good for a single was what the illustration that we now have for the album, The Number of the Beast.
Yeah, great. That's definitely great trivia there. All right, well let's just say a few short words on the Made in Japan EP. I mentioned that in the intro. Made in Japan. Uh, the international version was 5 songs. The European and Japanese edition had Running Free, Remember Tomorrow, Killers, and Innocent Exile. The international edition has Running Free, Remember Tomorrow, Wrathchild, Killers, Innocent Exile. So it adds Wrathchild to it. What jumps out to me about this is how great the band sounded live. And we were talking off camera about this yesterday, that The recording quality is really, really good. I haven't listened to
Mm,
this EP in ages. I have it on vinyl. Put it on and was shocked at how great it sounded. And it kind of makes you wish, I'm sure they recorded the entire show or maybe multiple shows on this tour. It kind of makes you wish that they would put a package together of live Diano era stuff or stuff that didn't make it onto the EP. There is other live Diano era stuff when the Ed box set came out. There's the BBC stuff and some miscellaneous stuff. But yeah, I was just taken aback by how great it sounded and how
mm.
cool they probably could have gotten away with releasing a full length live album at this point in time in their career. I think the song selection is pretty cool. You know, you get uh, Remember Tomorrow, Innocent Exile is on here. So you get some kind of, you know, songs from that era, deep cut things a little bit. I mean, you know, Wrathchild is something that we would hear a lot, but in the future, Killers is on here. That sounds really good. So yeah, it's a really cool. Sounds great. Doesn't sound cheap or kind of throwaway or anything. Sounds like it could have been a professional double album or certainly a really cool single, full live album. So, what are your thoughts on Made in Japan?
I totally agree on the sound quality. I think it just sounds amazingly good. It was recorded in Nagoya, Hosien Nenkin Hall. I apologize to anyone speaking Japanese. And was recorded on the 23rd of May on their first, of course, their first tour of Japan was the third gig in Japan. Um, I think the tempo of the songs is just ludicrous. I mean, the song "Running
Yeah,
Free" it's more or less like double speed. Remember Tomorrow, when they go into the more intense parts, it just picks up speed like it's it's. If you ask me, I think it's ruining the song. It
yeah,
doesn't sound good enough for me. I think the only song that sort of get away with it is on the international version. Rothschild sounds okay, and I think the version of Killers is also okay. Innocent Exile is also a bit too fast for comfort, I think.
yeah.
There is a funny story when I first heard this album. Uh, as a kid, I knew there was this guy at the school I was going to who was I knew he had Made in Japan. So and he was in the like the grade above me. So I brought a cassette to school and I said, "Can you please tape this album for me? I like Iron Maiden. Could you do that?" And he taped it for me. And as I was listening to it, he had recorded it on the wrong speed.
Oh man.
So it's quite funny when Paul Diano introducing the song "Remember Tomorrow" goes, "We'll slow down a little bit now."
That's funny.
And apparently he thought he was like he didn't really enjoy that EP. He didn't think it sounded good.
That's funny.
So apparently he thought it was supposed to sound like that. It was so fun. But then again, when I finally bought it myself, and I heard the proper speed, it was too high speed. So it
Yeah, I don't
was
remember
quite funny.
seeing this one in stores. I didn't get this until I got it on vinyl years later when I started collecting vinyl in the late 90s. It was something I never saw it on cassette. I mean, maybe it was in the import vinyl section, but I never came across it till years later. So it was kind of a fun little treat when I got this on vinyl because at that point none of these other Diano era live stuff had been released, so it was really the only live stuff that I had heard from the Diano era. So it was cool for that. But okay, all right. So there you go. There's Killers. I think we've done a pretty good job here covering Killers and everything that was going on with the band at this time. The band really starting to pick up speed and everything. So. We'd like to thank everybody out there for listening. If you would like more content, Got here. You got final thought before I wrap it
Yeah,
up?
I think to round this up, we have to mention the departure of Paul Diano a bit more.
Yeah, I thought maybe we'd save that for when
Mm.
we talk about Paul leaving and Bruce coming in with the number of the beast. How about that?
Okay.
All right. So yeah, we're gonna save that for you so you can listen for we're gonna talk on the next episode. We're gonna be talking about Number of the Beast, and we'll be talking about the exit of Paul and the entrance of Mr. Bruce Dickinson.
What a
So
cliffhanger.
yeah, right. It's a cliffhanger. If you want more metal rock related content, some people out there may already be watching this on the Layer of the Alchemist YouTube channel, you can see a video version of this podcast there. Also on that channel, I talk and have guests on to talk about all kinds of hard rock and heavy metal related subjects. I also have a podcast, two podcasts, AC/DC, Kicked into Teeth, an AC/DC podcast that I do with author Martin Popoff, and a Black Sabbath podcast I do with my friend Darren called Into the Void, a Black Sabbath podcast available on all the podcast streaming networks. Mattias has a band called Dead Cosmonaut. If you're a fan of Iron Maiden, I'm pretty certain that you will like Dead Cosmonaut. So make sure you check out Dead Cosmonaut. Okay, so I think that wraps it up for this episode. We'd like to thank everybody out there, and we will see you somewhere in time.